We've been thinking a lot about Oscar, this week because of the webinar we did the other night, which I hope some of you were with us for that, because there were some really wonderful people talking, Jolene Grove, Sarah Angel, Robert Enright, bringing their readings of their work and their sense of the history of Oscar coming from Europe, of course, in 1940, fleeing oppression in Nazi Germany with his family. His father was an activist journalist and had a very interesting and important career in illustration before coming to Canada. And then of course comes here and becomes the kind of ignition button for the Painters 11. And that's something I think that has not really been understood. When we think of the Painters 11, we tend not to think of Oscar Cahén, even though he was absolutely the central instigating figure of it at the beginning. In 1953. We think about William Ronald staggering around in his caftan with his harem of, sexy ladies, and Harold Town. The Painters 11 took on a completely different complexion after Oscar's death. And so I think because of the kind of hijinks of the Painters 11 after Oscar's death, people have not really looked at how sophisticated the movement actually was. And I think the other thing was that the Painters 11, the story of abstraction in Canada, this is kind of the other thing we're going at here today, has always been about Quebec. It's always been about Bourgeois, Riopelle, and the Automatistes. And of course, that story is very dramatic, and it's earlier, it's 1948, and whereas Painters 11, 1953. But it's also that abstraction in Quebec was married to this kind of social revolution of coming out of this repressive Catholic society and, Quebec joining kind of modernity and secular society. So it was like a social movement with art in it, the same way that the ABEX movement in the US was really about American ascendancy and, also a kind of liberation from, sort of post-war mores. Yeah. Abstraction in Toronto was really an art movement, more or less kind of an art movement about art in a different, different parameters to it. And so I think that it's been overlooked by people, and people haven't really valued how sophisticated the Painters 11 were. And let's remember too that in 1953, they're starting an art movement in which there are, Alexandra Luke and Hortense Gordon. There's two women in the group. There's Oscar Cahén, who is the central figure in the group, who is a Jewish immigrant to Toronto. There's Katsuo Nakamura, who was interned in a Japanese, prisoner of war camp. So there's multiple cultural streams coming into Painters 11, which was really unusual for Toronto at that time. Yeah. And prior. Any immigrant artists in Toronto tended to come from Sheffield, or other places in the UK. So there was a sort of an exotic mix in the Painters 11 that we kind of don't think about. So anyway, it's been a pleasure, Pat, to have had an occasion to be thinking about these artists, because I was saying to our director, Ian Desjardins, and his partner, Eric Pearson here, who does our exhibition design at McMichael, don't we need to do a Painters 11 show? Yeah. Because I remember walking into the basement of John Risley, who's a wonderful collector of, among other things, Maud Lewis, and he lives in Halifax. And I went into the basement, and there was this, 10 by 12 foot canvas down there. And his basement is very nice, by the way. It's not at all a diss that it's in the basement. But I said, oh my God. I said, John, who painted this? And he said, well, William Ronald. I was like, well, I'll be damned, this is incredible. And I'd kind of been schooled to think that, Toronto abstraction was kind of not up there with the Quebecers. Exactly. You know what I mean? So that was a revelation. And then the last couple of art fairs, the one we just had, and the one that was 2 years before that, killer Graham Coftrees also, another, not part of the Painters 11, but another Toronto, sort of quasi-abstract painter, just so much better than we've understood. So I think there's a way in which Toronto has not really,
we've told the story enough.
Yeah, or that we just don't think of ourselves as a very rich, deep bohemian culture. And that's why I was just so much wanting to have David and Gina here with us today, because I thought it was really important to have, two of Toronto and Canada's best painters, and both of whom, make forays between abstraction and representation, as does Cahén. Read these paintings for us from the point of view of practitioners. We can all go blah, blah, blah as much as we want, but we don't know how to make paintings. They do.
Not
So-
really, but we'll try.
But anyway, I just want to thank you both so much for being here. And both these artists, I'm sure many of you know them, they both show their work with Jane Corkin. They're also married to each other, so the wonderful thing about this is that what they're going to do now is probably what they do an awful lot.
Yeah.
Every time I run into you guys, you're together and you're looking at paintings.
Yeah.
Sometimes at McMichael.
That's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just fantastic to have you here. So let's talk about The Warrior.
The Warrior was Oscar's largest and sort of most magnificent painting. And in '57, my father had a painters' luncheon show at the Park Gallery. And they gave this painting pride of place. And for those of you who may not seen it, I've got a reproduction of a color transparency I had of the group who were there sitting around sort of giving homage to this. And they put it, as I say, in the Park Gallery, which is a very modern gallery for the 50s, in pride of place. And so when it came in here, and they took it out of the crate, I started clapping. But you know, this is our pride of place here, and it's just so lovely to see it come home again to Toronto. And it is magnificent.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And, you know, before I start, you know, rhapsodizing and carrying on, as is my custom, I'd love to hear how you two see this picture, because, you know, it's a monster.
Yeah, it really is. I'd like to pick up on something you're just mentioning about how this work seems like a revelation to us in many ways right now.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things about that is it's hard to celebrate your culture when you can't see your culture.
Right.
And I think we've had this problem in Toronto in particular, like you probably remember as well as Gina and I, the hallway in the former Barton Myers AGO.
Yes.
That was dedicated to the group of Painters 11.
Yeah.
And that hallway didn't change for about 15 years. So the paintings that we saw, you know, the terrific Nakamura on the blue background, the strongest Jock MacDonald paintings, but that was it. I mean, that was all we saw.
It was actually only one side of that hall, because I
That's
remember
right.
it was
One
a face-off with the Quebec on one side and Ontario on the
That's
other.
right. And it was one side facing each.
Yeah.
And there was no mix-up, there was no context outside of that hallway.
Yeah.
And
no context in relation to international art either.
No.
It was like,
none.
here's Canadian abstraction, and now on to something more interesting. You know?
Really strange.
Yeah.
And sadly, I think it led an entire generation of artists to think along the lines, and certainly I'm guilty of it, that abstraction in Toronto didn't have the vivacity and the range and depth
somehow
that
the
it had.
authenticity, the urgency.
Somehow,
Yeah.
yeah. And so a work like this is a revelation to me in many ways. First of all, just to have the opportunity to see it.
See it, yeah.
So then you go from there. But the thing that strikes me about this painting and Cahén's achievement in totality is he has this view that's almost Olympian, I would say, of world abstraction, what was going on in England, what's happening in Europe, and abstract expressionism and Canada. So when he paints, it doesn't have the, I would say, the sadness that I would ascribe to abstract expression.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of
Tragedy.
roiling and tragic dimension to that. He deals with these subjects, but he also takes a view of, I think of him like a hummingbird. He goes from idea to idea very rapidly, so rapidly that you don't notice that he's going from idea to idea. Gina said something to me.
After I watched the talk the other night, I thought, these paintings are really deeply complicated, and there's a lot of a lot of things are going into them at once, you know? And I was thinking about de Kooning and how he never wanted to join the American abstract artist group. Because he didn't want to be pigeonholed into just, you know, doing abstraction, right?
Yes.
And he wanted to be able to add everything into his work.
And move back and forth as
Not
did
take
Cahén.
out, but
Yeah.
add to the work.
Yeah.
And this painting reminds me of that. You want to add, figure, abstraction, and then to go on, you want to add, pain, joy, love, a tree, a figure,
Pleasure, despair, yeah.
a space that can only be in painting. Like you want it all there, and that's what I thought about this painting. Is it reminds me of, that attitude.
I start seeing it as a survivor, as a self-portrait, as someone of his generation has experienced all these things and internalized them. And this is not to diminish this painting in any way, but here we can see Rothko.
Yeah.
Sure. Here we can see maybe Graham Sutherland and the pictograms of Gottlieb. Again, Sutherland, Henry Moore, maybe Hans Hartung. Like there's all these various
Guston.
things.
The
Philip Guston, I don't know if he thought about Philip Guston that much, but it's in the work.
No, but it's in the work. It's the
See, what I think
the
about
air.
Guston here is I look at this figure, and it's very fierce on first, observing it. But then it almost becomes comic with these skinny little arms, these kind of frustrated little, flippers almost. And then of course the head's exploding. So there's something kind of comic in a kind of manic kind of way. And Sarah Angel was so smart the other night. She said, in Jewish culture, some rabbi had told her, is all about the joy and the oi, that it's like the pain and suffering and joy and gratitude all in one big schlemiel, And, but I do see this as grotesque in a way that to me relates to Guston, to where Guston would go. I'm not saying he was influenced by Guston, because I don't even know at this point if Guston was making representational paintings. Yes. But there's something like wonderfully human about this, and vulnerable about this fleshy kind of blobby.
It's incredible how I think often of the limbs in his paintings or the hands in his paintings, they're like knots at the end of a balloon.
Yeah.
So, you have a shape which can be an amorphous shape, and then you add this hand to it, and all of a sudden the shape is filled with tension.
Yes.
And it's anthropomorphic.
Yeah.
And we start reading all sorts of different things into it. And he does that everywhere in this show. You'll see these appendages that all of a sudden are contorting our perspective of what the shape is, making it an animal, making it a person, making it a struggling form. It's very powerful, and it's very playful at the same time. Like you said, it's got this kind of angstiness to it, but at the same time, these are characters. And I was struck by that chess set in the other room, which was made very early in his career, but has all the hallmarks of the forms that percolate throughout all these.
Absolutely,
these
what a
paintings.
great move to put that in the show. Yeah. Anyway, it's just amazing to have this here and to think of something like this being kind of in private hands right now, because it is. I mean, I don't know if this is made in response to. Like, I don't know it. My understanding is that he made it in response to a suit of Portuguese armor that he saw in a show at the ROM. So it's this kind of eternal warrior, but to me, he's almost a kind of a, I don't know, almost.
Yeah, but there's also a searching too. In
comic,
it, like,
bombastic figure.
Like that center, he's searching for a new kind of painting. He wants to see something new there that he's probably never seen before. Kind of, I feel like as a painter.
You're talking about
yeah,
this section.
that
here?
section there. It's you're striving to see the new in your work, right, and not be not satisfied, because he was such a great drawer. He could draw anything, right?
Yeah.
So he probably was very familiar with a lot of his, to be able to draw the figure that well is so hard, right? And then to try to break it down and do something else.
Yeah, it's almost to see him in these works and his painting in general, challenging his mastery of the graphic form, right? So, I see it entirely as an advantage in his work. And, we know many of the abstract expressionists, Gorky and de Kooning, were incredible draftsmen as well, who sort of transcended that by seeking eruptions
Yeah.
unexpectedness
Yeah.
like we see here. And that's what puts this in this category. I mean, I've been thinking, you know, in terms of the art fair that happened recently and the painting that's happening right now. Amy Silman, for example, a very successful, popular painter, or even George Condo. You know,
That
Cahén
brutalist
painted
touch.
his way way into the future in these paintings, and he almost predicted the present moment where everything is acceptable if it's presented through an individuated
Yeah.
consciousness.
Trajectory.
You
Yeah.
can see
Yeah.
that he has the forethought to bring all these things together, but it's remarkable that, and in a way that none of the other painters 11 do. They're more stylistic painters.
Yes.
They find a group of forms and then they hone it, refine,
And they refine that. Yeah.
And he's constantly in this poetic space of drawing from multivalent visual
Yeah,
systems.
and kind of trying to get beyond his own facility
Yeah.
to keep breaking down the lines. It makes me thinking about David Milne, who was a similar kind of
Yes.
artist that,
Yeah.
that was always like trying to step away from the, you know, from facility to find something that was more.
Well, Milne had a similar thing because he, again, like in these paintings, if we look at Franz Klein or going back to de Kooning, there's a sense of earthiness in the sense of the struggle with the material that's very different. It's rooted in landscape, it's rooted in portraiture. It's very different from what happens in these paintings and his work in general because they're coming from a more graphic system where I think it's just astounding that you can have a painting that's as dark as this painting is, and yet we read it as being entirely about light.
Yes.
So, and that's his sense of like layering, and despite the amount of black, that's not really a black painting.
No.
That's a vibrating orange and pink painting. So, you know, this sense of layering and thinness, maybe Max Beckmann had a similar quality, but very few painters have that
that's
ability to be dark and yet uplifting.
And yet to have
you
a
know,
sense of
yeah.
radiance coming through, and I think that I think it was Robert on on our talk earlier this week talking about Rothko here, and he's obviously really interested in the ways in which, I mean, Gina is a mistress of hot pink and orange, I would say, in your painting, Gina, and you know, like those are tough colors to handle.
I think I feel like I see pink in so many paintings, art historically as well. Like if you look at Vermeer, there's pinks and reds, and really, he's a really complicated colorist, right? And I think it's the same here. I would be thinking of Bonnard and Rothko and all those painters. I'm pretty sure, you know, it's all in there, right? And then when we're talking about the darks, I mean, then, you know, I think about Ad Reinhardt and how he showed us the light and shadow.
Yes.
Right? And in a way, this painting is like that. It's the light and shadow.
Yeah, Reinhardt's a fascinating point of comparison, and you wonder how much he would be aware of Reinhardt, because they have so much in common, really.
I know that you know, what we do is you seek out what you need at all times, and, you know, whether it's in a magazine or a book, pamphlet, a book, whatever, then, you know, he'd be ultra aware of everything that was going on. You can't make paintings that are this deep unless you are. Yeah. You just can't, because you have to be in a dialogue with the history of art. All the history of art. To me, that's a big part of it. And, you know, illustration.
Yes, as well.
And
it's so interesting in Canada that we have, you know, so many artists who come out of commercial illustration, particularly in Toronto. It's a real feature.
Because I think that there's probably a history in illustration of, you know, like a master, and you're shown how to do it. Yes. Right? And there were women and men. I mean, I was thinking, Wayne Thiebaud talks about, he never went to art school.
Is that right?
But he became an illustrator, and he says the women and men were masters at their craft. He said there was one woman he worked under who he thinks drew better than Matisse. And that idea of craftsmanship and passing it along, you know, because drawing a figure has got to be the most difficult thing you could try to do, right? And yet, you know, you have to work on it. It takes a long time and maybe a lifetime, I don't know. Some people have a facility for it early on, like Picasso. Picasso could do it at 15, right?
We look at what he did, and you know, it's with a certain amount of envy because you know, all those McLean's covers, you know, the
Christmas
the
shopping
fluidity and the humor, I think, in his work. That
extremely
permeates
witty.
it. Yeah, and that humor is only possible through mastery as well, right?
Exactly.
You can't tell a good joke without the structure being perfect. And you know, he has that quality, and it makes me think that maybe abstraction was maybe a bit more of a joy for him than others, because he could so freely move amongst all of its ideas, given his background.
But still hold on to that central idea of line.
That's
you know,
right.
He has this incredible,
That's
beautiful
right.
line in
Never
the
leaves the
illustration
work, and is rooted in graphism for sure. Yeah.
This picture over here behind Pat.
This one right off the bat, I think everyone would see the extraordinary color combinations. And yet, here we go again. We've got this black background, we've got predominantly dark picture, and then we have that flash of green in the center, and that flash of orange that, if they weren't there, the painting would simply sort of just die. An undistinguished kind of death. And then the genius of this little bit of Pollock-like splashing that's under that form, that becomes the dominant shape in the painting, is so perfectly realized. It's a very Matisseian moment to just sort of like leave this casual thing as an emblem
with
embedded in the painting.
a little drawing.
With a little bit of drawing.
Because you can never leave drawing, right?
Yeah.
And it's so playful that it belies the virtuosity of the image. And same with these colors here. You know, you have to wonder when you look at this painting, how do we reconstruct?
Yeah.
Right. It must have been a much more colorful painting in a sense.
And then he added over it.
And then he added the graphic strokes. But what we're left with is this kind of stained glass-like, luminous, quality that's so much more memorable, I think, than a painting that would have been dominated by the underpainting. One of the painters, 11, talked about him as introducing pastel into the lexicon in Canadian abstraction. I think that's probably true. And moments like this where, you know, from a distance you read the painting as, say, gray or black, and then you realize that it's blue.
It's blue.
This is an ivory, and this is like a stroke that was applied later in the image that's redefining the form, simplifying the form, but it's in a genuine white. It makes you aware of all the relative tones within the painting. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, I keep going up here to this like flabby underarm.
That's right.
You know, and then these colors up here to this blue ball that sort of inexplicably is, floating up there. It's wonderful.
And the scale is something to remark on too. It's it feels like a giant painting. It is actually not a giant painting. But it has this grandiose, truly
Incredible.
magnificent projection of scale, which I think some of the smaller images have as well. Ability
They pack a punch, like they're bigger than they punch above their weight class, like this beautiful little Motherwell-esque.
Motherwell,
Yeah.
But also Morandi, like I
And there's
think
that
about those
painting.
shadows in between the Morandi figures.
Yes.
It could be almost a still life too, right? And the color too, with the grays and the
Yes, it's wonderful. So let's wander out here and take a look at TrépanierBaer. It has such an incredible feeling of momentum inside it.
Yeah, it has a gyroscopic motion. It's like an energizer bunny of paintings.
It also feels kind of creaturely too. I mean, I think it's kind of a twin cousin or something to the warrior.
He had to invent a word to describe what was going on.
Yes.
Here, right?
Yeah.
Something like this, like just maybe Gina, you could talk about these, the graphic forms that define the painting. How do you see those?
Well, I feel like they're like reaching arms, reaching out. It could be a figure.
But I'm more specifically, don't you think that he made this stroke and then extended it later, and that he made this stroke and extended it from the circle? Like there's this sense of like he makes an image and then he's like, it's just not radical enough.
Yeah.
It has to be something absolutely shocking.
Yeah.
Like the birth in that film Alien, right?
Yeah.
It has that feeling of this
coming out to grab you. Yeah. That's true.
And then this is probably as far as he ever pushed his color, in terms of chroma and graphism all combined in one image. I mean, there's so much to think about. You could make an entire image out of this pink outline within the blue, right? And that's kind of like a painting within a painting. And he does that with the
Couple
orange.
of those.
And all of those moments are entirely cohesive.
And yet it all fits together.
Yeah, there's a lot of complicated painting going on here and drawing and, it's hard to know exactly what we're looking at. It's difficult to,
But it's certainly
but
all.
you feel it.
Yeah, it certainly all comes together though in this the way he's arranged the composition. It's kind of this is a sort of a seems like Cahén with less of like it's more like just him, know.
It's in this kind of primal place that I associate with
Like a child's
Karl
drawing.
Oppel and some of the Dutch painters of the mid-century as well. I see it very much. Their totemic form, his and hers, maybe a conversation,
But also King
something
and Queen.
like that.
It's
King and
interesting that we're standing
Queen
beside this.
from the chess set. Technically, I think it's very interesting that he laid down a sheet of paper, painted a pink border, and then at some point decided to soften that border with pastel. And winds up with two shades of pink that are an absolutely magical framing device for this. Think of Howard Hodgkin maybe doing stuff like that, but again, this is so
It is like
freshly, it's a totally fresh image. And it is, I guess, free of some of the graphic, I don't know if they function as crutches, but he tends to want to populate his images more in the paintings. And this suggests a whole new area, and I think we can only guess. We can only guess, but I think he would have started exploiting this kind of radical simplicity
more open.
in his
What
later
date is
work.
this again? This is 51, so he's got another 5 years in him here. But I mean, I just think also, let's just take a look and revel in the wetted to wet technique here with the water. I mean, it's just amazing. He makes wetted to wet like a form of drawing.
Exactly. It's something that you always see in watercolor. Rarely does it strike you as radically interesting in the way that it does here.
Or that starts to almost be a figural component, and again, when I think about works on paper and working with watercolor, I do find myself thinking about Milne, even though the work is so different.
Well, I think
because he makes those kinds of effects of those materials.
That's right.
Replicate or stand in as equivalents to states of nature of melting, and
That's right.
There's a very radical ability to see what this effect is able to trigger and associate in your mind.
Yeah. And Milne had a similar mastery of drawing that was the color in Milne starts to dissolve or overtake that. It's almost like he's breaking down the components of painting. I don't think Milne's ever got his due for how radical those paintings are. And again, I could see this as an homage to late Milne in his fantasy watercolors as well. In this piece as well, where we have I think he was developing a cast of characters, kings and queens and jesters, and I mean these are the things that come out of School of Paris paintings, but they also come out of you know, the deeper history of European religious painting and
Yes.
things like that. And you can see these characters playing a part here. The face of that king is extraordinary. It's an African mask, but it also has a very sad kind of
Yeah.
disposition
There's a lot
to
of
it.
pathos.
It's-
And then this
it's-
kind of slapstick effect here. It's kind of like
this is really
cartoon Sunday morning.
a funny bit. It's
Yeah.
like Warner Brothers meets Rouault. You know, it's got fabulous disparities within it as well. But again, super
you're
well
right. This is-
articulated in terms of color and composition.
Love the chest hair, whatever that is.
Chest hair. I didn't even read that as chest
I
hair.
read
That's
that as,
fabulous. Yeah, that's
A
great.
broken.
This wonderful knotted
Yeah.
hands, a little bit of
Another
soul
one of those.
electrog maybe there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's just fantastic. And the pink again, unexpectedly
Yeah.
perfect for the dark image. But yeah, I just would say about the show in general,
Yeah,
how can you pick a favorite? The,
I
the
know,
show
it's
vibrates with potential,
yeah.
and these are paintings that were made 70 years ago. It doesn't get better than that.
No.
They're still alive. They're still
They sure are.
suggesting possibilities to us. It's the highest achievement you can make in painting, I think.
It's been amazing. I don't think that I have ever had such a reaction to a panel talk and to an actual installation where people were literally jaw-dropping when they came in. Not just because of the very large warrior, but because how they are so beautiful. They look like they were painted yesterday. So it's been very successful, both evenings. And I learned today an awful lot. I mean, David Urban and Gina Rorai are amazing contemporary Canadian painters, and like painters who love paint. And hearing them talk about the paintings gave me more and more insights today. So much as I've read everything, listening to the panel the other night and today, it's just been, I think, a great success. And it's up for another 3 weeks. I'm hoping that Eve will be able to get here before it goes down so we can at least just see it.
Do you think the warrior will actually end up being bought by that consortium you were referring to?
Well, there was several people were talking at the Thursday night opening about finding a consortium to buy it and donate it, which I think would be fabulous because it really does, I think, belong in, well, I would prefer to see it go to an art gallery, National Art Gallery or Art Gallery of Ontario, where it would be on view more. But if somebody wants to buy it privately, that's fine too. Having that talk today was extraordinary, and I think David and Gina were amazing, and I learned a lot from them.
Has it been a successful homecoming because of your father and all that? You could just bring it back.
Oh, I just, I look at the color transparency, which I made into a card, of them sitting around this painting. And it was in the pride of place in the Park Gallery in 1957, and they all gathered around it for this photograph. And when it came in, I just had this sense of incredible history as it came in, and it is in pride of place here as well. So yeah, it brought back, I mean, I was too young, sadly, to remember Painters 11 shows or to remember the Park Gallery, but I certainly heard much oral history about it. And I have these fabulous photographs that have captured so much. So, and my father had a really fabulous, obviously, Painters 11 collection, which was donated eventually to the McMichael Gallery. Sadly, I don't even have one. It could have left me one, right? Just like one, but no. I do have this historic feeling when I keep looking at those black and white photographs and thinking, how amazing it is. It's come back to Toronto, how many years later. And I've had this feeling that it's kind of come home in a way. So, but I truly hope it finds a wonderful home. I hope they all do. But that one in particular is spectacular. And I think it sums up so much of the beginnings of Painters 11 because he passed away partway through, but he was the guiding light, as Sarah said. So I just hope that it goes somewhere where it can be on view more. Or that this consortium will pull it together, one or the other. I mean, that's how we got the Henry Moore and the Archer for City Hall, was a group of people donated enough to buy it for City Hall. So we have a tradition of that.
Two more last questions. What do you think Oscar would think of this exhibit? Do you think he'd be happy coming out of storage?
Oh, I think he'd be delighted. I mean, I think, his death was so sudden, so accidental, that I doubt that he was even thinking about his legacy at that point, because he was going strong. He had this group of painters, 11 around him. And, and then they all, his widow sort of hid them all for a number of years. And to see them beautifully restored, like the estate has honestly paid a lot of money to have them restored and magnificently framed. So I like to think that he would be truly delighted, as would my dad, I think, as well. So we have 2 legacy items from this show, in the same way that the big book is a legacy from the Beaverbrook show. And one is the panel, which everybody said was fabulous. And the second was the talk today, which I learned as much from as I did the panel the other day. The insights of Robert Enright were magnificent. Jolene, Sarah Angel, Sarah Milroy, as always, was great. But I think having 2 well-known Canadian painters, contemporary painters, talk about these was the perfect thing. So in my mind, it's been an incredibly successful week. And I just wish Eve could have been here.